please, thank you. He's being helped by Dustin with the audio. Tonight, after the presentation, we'll be serving some delicious cookies that were provided by Cookies for a Cure, and a foundation that supports pediatric, or that's where it started out, supporting pediatric cancer research by raising money by selling homemade cookies. Their first year, their efforts earned $1,000, and up till a year ago, they earned $450,000 that year. And I was fortunate to meet Susie, or Sue, I guess the baker and the founder of this company, this foundation. And she told me that this all started on when her daughter had a very rare form of cancer that had spread all over. And she was giving me all these facts, so I am not sure about this. But so that had to be at least 8 or 9 years ago. And everything that could possibly be done for her with OSU, the next level of care, they did not recommend for her child. So, but they knew that Boston might be able to help her. So she and her husband and the family, or her daughter, they stayed in Boston for six weeks. Her daughter, they had to stop what was intended to be an operation. They had to stop it because her daughter was in such a precarious situation. So one of the reasons they went to Boston was because it had proton something therapy. And it was this wild at the time building, circular like a silo. And her daughter had to be strapped to the table, and she was sent in, and it turned out that this proton therapy was very successful for her. So her mom, Sue, and her family are supporting this. So they have provided us with the cookies for today. As an official thing, I would like to recognize our current president of the chapter, Karen Lackey, and she, how did I say it? She guides us through the year and with our social gatherings and our meetings. And now we have a longtime member of P.E.O. in general, P.E.O. International, who is a member of FA chapter, and she's known as a P.E.O. Golden Girl. And she is going to tell us about the projects that P.E.O. sponsors. Pat.
Right. Ooh. Well, it's good to see all of you here. Thank you so much for coming. And I'm excited to tell you about our projects, especially the Educational Loan Fund, which is Katie Rarick was a recipient of that. And we have a few other ones I will introduce later that have in past years and coming up. But I want to give you a little bit about history and what P.E.O. is. People ask me, what is P.E.O.? And we say P.E.O. because it's so much easier than saying the Philanthropic Educational Organization. And that is what we are. We are a philanthropic educational organization, and we have many different programs that we're very proud of, 6 of them. We are an organization that is, I think, 157 years. We were organized in 1869, and so it's post-Civil War days. And we were founded by 7 women who wanted to start a society of their own. And that's how P.E.O. became founded. It ended up being a community organization that ended up traveling as the gals moved from Iowa to Chicago, Ohio. Our first chapter here in Ohio was up in the Cleveland area. And in fact, one of our founders is buried there in a cemetery up there in Cleveland. But anyway, that was our first one. And then our first project was the Educational Loan Fund that was founded in 1907. So we are almost 100 years old, next year. So that's pretty amazing. The Educational Loan Fund, it started out being some women had a booth at one of the World's Fairs, and the money, I think there was like $300 or something collected, at that fair, and that they decided we're going to use it for educating women. And so that's how the Educational Loan Fund, was originally founded. The Educational Loan Fund, as of July 1st, just a couple days ago, they changed the amounts, which is very exciting. So I think you've got one of these, flyers, and it has on here. I need my reading glasses. The other day I would have been able to recite and tell you the amounts. But a few years ago, we were finally able to help people going to get a certificate or an associate's degree. And up until just a few years ago, we were not able to do that because you had to be within 2 years of receiving a degree. So now, for a non-degree program or a certificate or associate's degree, you can borrow up to $15,000. A bachelor's degree, $20,000, $25,000 for a master's degree, and $30,000 for a doctoral degree. What is amazing about this is it's only 2%. It's only 2%, and it's been that probably for over 30 years. It's just amazing. And if any of you have ever borrowed money from the government or a bank, they're probably 8.5% or more. And so it's just an amazing opportunity. So we're very proud of that. You need one co-signer for an educational loan fund, and you need to be, if you are an undergraduate student, you have to be within 2 years of your graduation. So, we're looking for students in their junior or senior year of undergraduate school to help them with loans. So that is that project. Our next project came right after the Second World War. In 1949, we started the International Peace Scholarship, and that was to help promote peace throughout the world. And so we are very proud of that. Those are scholarships to women that are studying from foreign countries here in the United States, and they are to return to their country to use, their knowledge and improve their way of living there. If they stay in the United States, it becomes a loan. And so, but that is just an amazing relationship to have with foreign students. Our next project that we formed was the program for continuing education, and that was in 1973, and that was for women that had a change in their lifestyle or something, from either a divorce or health reasons. Something changed in their life and they needed to go back to work to help support their family or themselves. And so the program for continuing education was started. And that one is, you have to be within 2 years of completing your program. You have to have at least 2 years of interrupted study and going to school to receive that. And those awards, I believe, are up to $4,000, is that right? And it is a grant. And so we are really excited, and our chapter has been very active in supporting women, with that particular one. Then it was in the early 1990s, I think it was 1991 or 3, we started the P.E.O. Scholar Award. And this one was founded to begin helping women that were working on doctoral degrees and doing something really outstanding in their field of study. And it was looked to be eventually an amazing opportunity an award to receive a P.E.O. Scholar Award. And that one is a $25,000 scholarship. And it can be used in travel and study, research, whatever. It doesn't have to be used for their tuition or anything like that, but it is an award for excellence in their field of study. And then the last one came in 2009. We had a study to study opportunities to help younger students, particularly high school students, a senior in high school that is going off to college, that she has to be an excellent student, but more than that, she has to show outstanding leadership qualities, her involvement in the community, and giving back to the community in that. And I do want to say we have one of our star scholarships, Jana Wilkerson, put your hand up. She's one that our chapter sponsored last year, and also her sister. We sponsored her sister. We can only do one at a time, and her sister was sponsored by another chapter in the area. So we were just really proud of her, and Jana's now going to be a junior in college in West Virginia. So that is, that scholarship is a $2,500 scholarship, to recognize them for their outstanding, ability. So I want to say that Haley Rogers here, and put your hand up, Haley. Our chapter has sponsored Haley for an educational loan fund, and we're waiting to hear from her. She graduated from Ohio State a couple years ago, and she's going to be going to Midwestern University in Phoenix, Arizona, and studying perfusion. And so we're wishing her luck, and we're really glad to have you here today. And the other thing is my daughter-in-law, Katie Spreen, was an educational loan fund recipient from our chapter, I don't know, was it 20 years ago almost? She was going to graduate school at University of Pittsburgh studying to be a speech pathologist. And she's now a speech pathologist. Excuse me, Katie, I need your help. At Columbus City Schools. So she works with 2 elementary schools here in the Columbus area. And I know she knows some sign language too, because she's taught my grandchildren some sign language. So hopefully there's a handout that you received, and it has a lot of information about our P.E.O. information on that. And any of us that are here will be happy to answer any more questions. We really welcome you here. I know you're going to enjoy Katie Rarick. I worked with her on a Zoom committee a few years ago, and so we finally got to meet each other in person today. So anyway, I will pass it over to you.
The word I was thinking of when I was preparing some words here was the word serendipity. And serendipity is finding something valuable, something delightful, when you least expect it. So at Ohio's P.E.O. convention this May, Sally Levander and Karen and I went. But Sally and I were running late, which was kind of common, for the last big gathering, the project's luncheon. And neither of us had anticipated what it took to funnel 400 guests through one doorway into the banquet room at the Hilton Polaris Hotel. And of course, we ended up at the end of the line. And oh, why'd we do this? Why'd we take so long? Why didn't we get here sooner? Were the things that went through our mind. By the time we got in, most of the tables were filled, and the wait staff was frantically setting up additional tables. So Sally and I looked. We looked at a table against the wall, and we were looking for, two openings there. And so we saw a table right against the wall. And so we asked them if we could join them. And as happens throughout the convention, everyone's so wonderful and everyone is so welcoming. And they welcomed us with open arms. Here's where the word serendipity comes into play. Because we were so disappointed that we were so far from the dais where all the speakers were. And we sat down next to a young woman who introduced herself as Katie Rarick. Katie gave us a brief history of her involvement in P.E.O., and Sally honed right in on Katie's P.E.O. loan while she was in college. This was going to be a perfect example for our chapter meeting. So Katie graciously agreed to come and speak with us. Katie is a nationally certified American language interpreter who will speak to us tonight and then offer a question and answer time following her presentation. Katie.
I feel like I gotta be official up here. Oh, is this what a pastor feels like? Okay. All right. So what I just said was, hello, my name is Katie Rarick. Thank you so much for coming and being here this evening. I thought I would start, I'm sim-comming now, by bringing you into my world. So I'll start with P.E.O. first. I am a fourth generation P.E.O., which my mother lovingly reminded me of. I have my great-grandmother on my mother's side, who, her name is Dorothy. Too many ladies in my life that I love and cherish, and I never got to meet her. But then I have my grandmother, Roberta, who is a 50-plus year member, and she just passed on the 4th of July. So she is with me, and I'm very glad she's watching over me. And then my mother, Diane, I was initiated into her chapter in Northern Illinois, chapter OJ, when I was 21. So growing up, Mom made cookies. They were never for us. They were for P.E.O. And I was like, Mom, why don't we get to have the cookies, And she had these little stars everywhere. There's a star that said P.E.O. on it, which was a paperweight. And I remember picking it up and shaking all the stars inside. I was like, Mom, what does P.E.O. stand for? And she'd say, Philanthropic Educational Organization, but it means something else. I was like, okay, I'm your only daughter. Why can't you tell me? She's like, you just have to join. I was like, okay. So I went to tea parties, and I went to the Christmas parties, and I would sing with them. And I was a student at Kent State University here in Ohio. So I was able to complete my high school degree, and I started off at a community college where my mom worked in public relations. And that I finally took my first American Sign Language class, and I was like, wait. Interpreting is a profession. This is cool. I don't have to be a teacher. I don't have to be a speech language pathologist. Props to you. I didn't want to do 6 years of college or more. And I finally found interpreting, and I fell in love with it so fast. And it's just been such a gift to be awarded this loan, because when I got it, I was $12,000, and like Pat had said, it was a 2% interest rate, and you just pay all principal the whole time, and I had like a very small portion of interest rate at the very end each year, and I was like, this is amazing. And when I turned 25, I was given a gift from my grandfather when he passed away. I had some money given away to each of the grandchildren. I was able to pay off the rest of my loan. So at age 25, I was debt-free, which was such an amazing and special thing, and I'm very grateful for that. And I also used other money to go to Ireland with my mom and dad. But so P.E.O., I had known about it from a very young age. I didn't really know my grandmother was in it. But later, once I joined, I knew I have, a cousin and an aunt in Iowa. I have a great aunt in Arizona. I didn't realize that my great-grandmother was a P.E.O. and a sweet Adeline. It's like, wow, there is such a long, proud history, and I'm very, very grateful that I joined at such a young age. And I remember joining, like, okay, I'm 21, I have friends, I don't need this right now. I wasn't so sure about joining, but I was like, you know what? I remember being 5, 6, 7 and going over to one of my mom's P.E.O. sister's house. And she was probably in her 90s, and my twin brother and I went with my mom, and we helped shovel the driveway, and she gave us hot cocoa afterwards. And I was like, wow, this lady is so nice, and she's so sweet, but she's not my grandmother, and my mom is friends with someone who's 40-some years her senior. And I was like, wow, what is this thing? I knew it was out there. And then once I received the ELF, or the ELF loan, I was like, okay, I got to see what this whole thing's all about. And I joined, and my mom was vice president at the time. So for P.E.O. sisters, when you're initiated, there's this ceremony which has been used since 1869, and we all stand in a circle, and the president, vice president, treasurer, guard, and the 2 secretaries, which represent the 7 initial sisters, all stand in a circle, usually wearing white. And I hope I'm not disclosing any secrets. But each of the officers take turns reading something, and when they finally tell you what P.E.O. stands for, it just made me go, oh, I should have figured that out. It was so beautiful and so simple, and I am not allowed to tell you because I'm not the president, and this is not a whisper. But it's such a gift. And I have now been a P.E.O. for 11 years, believe it or not. So I am well on my way to 50 years, and I can't wait to be a Golden Girl one day. Yeah, I'll make it. I'll make it real good. So it's, this microphone wants to play around. I've been to, I think, 4 conventions now in Ohio. And my very first convention, I went to Xavier University in Cincinnati, and my mom was in Illinois at the same time. So we were going to convention, and I was on the little board, and she had her nails painted with P.E.O., and they were in the same color as their theme, which had something to do with a hot air balloon. But she was just yapping me up, and it's like, oh, my daughter's an ELF, like this is her, and that's what's on the poster that you might have seen, is my mom with her P.E.O. nails showing my face. So she's always been a huge support of me, and it's a gift not having any biological sisters, I have 2 brothers, and having sisters everywhere I go. And I know from my mom's experience, we moved quite a few times. I was born in Wisconsin, we lived in Missouri, and then in Illinois, and I went to college in Ohio. And my mom, found her niche. Like, she found her people so quickly, knew how to get a good doctor, get a good dentist, find the right church to go to, who can sing alto, who can sing soprano. Okay, we got all the voices covered for, Christmas. But I've really loved my time, and, as P.E.O. happens, once they find out what you're good at, they're like, hey, come here, do that. So my first role was being guard, and I got to give everybody a hug every time we had a meeting to take their password. But I was like, oh yes, tell me the password. But like, oh, it's so nice I also need the password. But hello, so good to see you. So it was a great way to learn names and learn the traditions that have been going on for over 150 years. So that's the P.E.O. story. Into the meat of it. When I was in kindergarten, I had a deaf classmate, and we learned probably yes, no, and at one point I think we learned America the Beautiful. So I learned how to sign that, I don't know how accurate it was. but we did it. And there was one time at recess, I remember this boy was running and we were all out on the soccer field and he kicked the ball and it hit me. And I knew something in me told me not to yell, but to sign no at him. And I was like, okay. He didn't look at me, he couldn't see me, he just kept on running because I didn't do any waving to get his attention. But that was my first kind of moment. And then in Illinois, I went to Grays Lake North High School, and we had the Deaf and Hard of Hearing program there. And my freshman year, we did the play Children of a Lesser God, which you may or may not know was the first movie to award for the actress who is deaf, Marlee Matlin, to win an Academy Award in the 1980s, somewhere in there. And so we did that play, and I was the assistant stage manager, and so we started to kind of pick up sign language here and there, and we had a deaf lead actress who played the main role of Sarah, and then the professor who was hearing, and he could sign and speak, and then all the other cast members learned how to sign for their roles. And we worked with interpreters and a few other deaf students from my high school. And I started to pick it up, and growing up, I was very much into theater and singing and choir. And I was like, oh, this stuff is easy. And I would practice in my room. I'm like, I can do a song. I'm like, you're hot and you're, I was like, practicing my stuff that no one would really see me do. But it was a fun secret language during study hall when, we're supposed to be doing our homework. And I'm just signing with my friends and spelling things. Or I'd have my deaf friends in gym class. I'm like, hey, what's the sign for penguin? And they'd be like, this. I'm like, that's so funny. Just those kind of random things you want to learn. And like I said, I went to community college and I took my first American Sign Language class, and that was it. I was in love. I thought it was the coolest thing ever. Both of my teachers for ASL 1 and ASL 2 were either current or former American Sign Language interpreters. And I was like, okay, so how do I do this? What's my path? I'm very much a type A planner kind of person. And once I kind of learned, okay, to be a good interpreter, you need to be nationally certified. What are those requirements? Get a bachelor's degree. It can be anything. Many interpreters, come from either someone like me where they just meet someone at church or something, and you're like, wow, this is cool. How do I do that? Or you have a deaf family member, which is called, if you have deaf parents, you have a CODA, which is child of a deaf adult. And so that means their first language would be sign language if the parents are signing. So their exposure to the world and their language is first visual as opposed to spoken. And then they probably have to go see Katie and do a lot of speech therapy because their parents probably sound like they have a deaf accent, which is what we call that. Train of thought. That? This is why I should have wrote note cards. I was like, I can just improv it. But so deaf culture, that's the thing that got me. I knew I wanted to help people. I wanted to give back. I wanted to use a skill. I didn't want to sit in an office just crunching numbers or be a teacher and make lesson plans, although that's admirable. I wanted to show up, do the work, and be done and go home. And interpreting is just that. But once I knew the long history of the oppression that the deaf people have faced, there's just a lot of negative things. It's been around for a very long time. And American Sign Language actually was influenced by French Sign Language. We tried to ask the Brits, and they didn't want to share. And I'm grateful because their alphabet is on 2 hands, and that's very strange to me. So Thomas Gallaudet met a Frenchman, Laurent Clerc, which I'm probably saying wrong. My husband studies French. He'll tell me later. It's okay. And Thomas Gallaudet had met this young girl who was deaf, Alice Cogswell, and he wanted to communicate with her. And they kind of figured out how to gesture, and he had started to learn sign language. And she had this doll, kind of like you would think, or maybe I'm combining stories, which is true. But it kind of started back in, that was the 1800s or so. And there was a conference in the late 1890s that decided that sign language was not the way, that oralism and forcing children to speak was the most common, was what was best for the children. I would disagree, but that is why there is such a delay in my profession. A sign language interpreter didn't become a thing as a profession until 1964 at Ball State University. It's just once they decided at this Milan conference, I think in 1893, that oralism was the predominant method of communication, sign language was pushed aside. It was like, oh, that's too easy. That draws too much attention. You're going to be lazy. You're not going to learn how to speak. You must conform to me, the hearing parent, whoever, the doctor. The medical viewpoint has been very predominant in the deaf community, and so there are many people who are probably my grandmother's age and not that much younger, who have not so good memories of going to school and being slapped on the wrist for signing. They were punished for trying to communicate in the least resistant way that they could. If you're familiar with education, there's always the LRE, the least resistant education kind of environment, and sign language is visual. If you can't hear, as you can imagine, I think of the I Love Lucy clip where the husband is trying to say all of the different throughs, twos, thous, the O-U-G-H, English is such a big mix of so many different languages. And it likes to ignore a lot of rules. And sometimes I'll have deaf people be like, what does this mean? I was like, give it to me in a sentence because I can't give you one word for one sign. For example, the word run, R-U-N, your nose is running. I'm going for a run. I am escaping. Is your car running? Are you running for office? Is there a run in your tights? There's 9 different signs for a 3-letter English word, depending on the context. And the same could go the opposite way. I could have one sign that would have 5, at least 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Like when you just do the sign for money, okay, is it money, finances, funds, financial? English loves to make up so many different words for one concept. So thinking about that, deaf children, I believe 90% of deaf children have hearing parents. So that means only 10% of deaf children have deaf parents and that they can communicate easily with each other, visually using sign language if that's what the parents also did. And so language deprivation is a huge problem in the deaf community. Meaning when you think about a baby growing up, we talk to them, we read them books, we sing to them. When they're playing in their crib or in their little bouncy thing, they're overhearing all of the conversations adults and friends and family are hearing, or when you're in the bus line or you're in the cafeteria, there's so much language that we as hearing people are exposed to. Deaf children don't have that. They can't hear it, they can't identify it, it all just sounds like, it's kind of like Charlie Brown. And so when I, as a sign language interpreter, freshly out of college, still pretty good for my class, am seeing a deaf student for the first time with cochlear implants, meaning they surgically went into their skull, destroyed the cochlea, which is the internal part that processes sound and turns it into language in your brain, put in a kind of a microchip sort of thing. So you're destroying millions of cilia in your ear and putting in an electronic, and it sounds really creepy. And he has no language. He's 5 and scared as I've ever seen a child look. And his parents speak Spanish at home, so that's another layer. And sometimes parents don't always buy in. They don't grieve that their child is different than them. We want what's best for our kid. We want the easiest path for them, and being deaf is not easy. This world is built for able-bodied hearing people. When I broke my knee, I don't know if you can see, but I've got a big old scar. I broke my knee 5 years ago, and I was like, oh, so this is what it's like to have to be on crutches and go from my car to that entrance to this elevator to get to my doctor's office. It's exhausting. And there's so many barriers that deaf and hard of hearing people have to go through because the world is not built for them. There was a documentary I watched in the very beginning of my college career, and it talked about there's Earth, E-A-R, Earth, E-Arth, and there's Ith, E-Y-E-T-H. And in a perfect world, everyone would be signing and it would all be visual, but there'd be no barriers, but deaf people are always stuck on earth, and they don't have that access. And it's very challenging for them. Like today, you know, I work full-time for a video relay company. I started my career in education. My heart is there. I love children. But it's very challenging to keep fighting an uphill battle against. I didn't have a very supportive principal at the time. But, you know, I always have to explain who I am and what I do. You know, when they answer the call, and I can like see a deaf person on my screen, kind of like Zoom, and I have a headset kind of like this, although it's bigger, and I can hear the hearing person at the same time. And because I've got one visual language and one auditory language, I have to do both at the same time. So not everyone's brain can do that. And I think I didn't have ADHD as a child. I think I do now. Because there's so much coming at you all at the same time, and you're managing and telling them like, oh, hey, they have an accent. Oh, I just heard a rooster. Don't know why, but I did. Or like, oh, they're probably working from home because I can hear a baby crying. You know, you give them all that incidental stuff that I am their ears for the deaf person, but I'm also equally the voice for a hearing person, because I would love for more hearing people to be like, oh, how can I communicate you, or communicate with you and modify to, and like, I don't remember your name, Jan asked me, how do I sign welcome? Perfect example. You want to sign, it can go either way. Sign language is very directional, and you use a lot of your space. And just us as the predominant group, hearing people, making things more easier for people to be like, oh, great, you care. I, as a deaf person, don't have to work so hard when I go into a space, you know, and just being willing to work with someone. So, as a video relay interpreter, that's where I was, I have to say, when I pick up the phone, like, hello, thank you, a person who is deaf and uses sign language to communicate is calling through the purple video relay service. I'm interpreter 5701. The hearing person usually goes, huh? Are you AI? Are you a robot? I was like, no, you just happen to be calling a deaf person, so they are using sign language because you don't know sign language and they don't use their voice. We're gonna do the phone call and I'm gonna be here facilitating this for you. They're like, okay, so I gotta get some buy-in. But usually I'm doing it here. It's from the hearing person to the deaf person to the hearing person. Rarely do I, as the interpreter, be like, hold up, no, let me introduce my voice. It's always a facilitation. And as I said, the profession is only, I can't do math, 60 some years old. And it's gone through many changes of helping too much to being backtracking and being too robotic. And now we're kind of in that middle of how do we kind of represent both cultures. And I can do those educational moments of like, and what's your phone number for us to call you back? I was like, I have a video phone, and so when you call, it might ring longer than you expect it to, and I've got to give the hearing person the understanding so it's more successful the next time they call them back or the next hearing person interacts with this deaf person. So it is a lot of advocacy. It comes with a lot of joys and a lot of pains. I see people from all walks of life. You know, I see grandmothers calling their sister. I see prisoners calling their family members. I interpret for very high-level business calls. You know, NASA, I got to interpret for Madonna and the Rolling Stones once, not because I'm great, but because they're like, hey, the concert's in 3 days. Who wants it? And I was like, yeah, sure, I'll give it a try. And it's allowed me so many beautiful opportunities to use the skills I have to grow as a person, to be more empathetic to all of the walks of life that I get exposed to. And just as a little quick wrap up, my husband Sam and I were on our way to Southwest Iowa to say goodbye to my grandmother. And we stayed overnight in Indianapolis on our way from here to Iowa. And we're going to this gas station, and I go to the bathroom, and I come out looking for Sam, and I see a woman coming in. We made one of these faces at each other, and I was like, she's like, Katie? And I was like, she and I went to the same church together when we were like 7, and she was in my high school production of Children of a Lesser God. We went to high school together, and I ran into her in Indiana. She's been working at the Indiana School for the Deaf for 6 years, I believe, and she and I just chatted in this gas station in sign language, voices off, except for when Sam was there, and be like, oh, right, I have to interpret for you because you don't know enough yet. Great. Tell me if I'm not speaking for you. And it was beautiful. It was just one of those things of you never know who you're going to meet, what serendipitous moment is going to come along. And now I can sign. We share the same language, and she was one of those students who had cochlear implants and used her voice predominantly in high school, but now she's kind of decided to give that up and do that and sign. And she teaches deaf students, and she herself is deaf, and we met when we were like 7 at some VBS kind of thing, and then we went to high school together, and she helped the students learn their lines in sign language, and that was just a really beautiful gift, you know, to be like, wow, this is a full circle moment 10 years, more than 10 years later. I can't do math anymore. 2012 is when we graduated high school, so it's been a gift, and I love doing it, and I love speaking to you about it, and now I will take some questions. And I do want to, while he's doing that, if you're gonna go pass the mic, I wanted to teach you two things in sign language, which I forgot to do. Hello is just like a really relaxed salute. Your thumb can kind of be wherever it falls, you know, just like if you move your hand, just have your thumb fall. It doesn't have to be at attention, but just like a hello and welcome. You're welcoming them in, and thank you is from your chin. Make sure it touches your chin and not underneath your chin, because you don't want to do that. And if you know, you know. So thank you, hello, welcome. I'll give you 3. And if you want to know more, if you're ready, you can go advance, but I'll go for questions now. Thanks. So I'm going into education. I'm going to be an elementary school teacher. And big question. Yeah. How? What's the best way to start implementing that in the classroom, or if you have a paraprofessional or someone else who is who helps with sign language in the classroom, what's the best way to implement that into the classroom and just make it kind of like a normal part of the classroom? Yeah, great question. So the question was, she's going into education, how do you incorporate sign language in the best way? The best way is always to defer to a deaf person. So if you can get a deaf person in, you know someone who knows someone, and they can, you know, the children can relate to a real world. But a lot of these kids, you're watching Miss Rachel on YouTube, and she does sign language, and there's a lot of hearing people who make videos, and I don't always know how qualified they are, because it's my second language. In 10 years into my profession, I have never taught sign language, because I've always been on the fence about how ethical that is to, you know, just like you have Susie White teach you Spanish, and Susie's not Hispanic, you know, in high school. So there's always those kind of questions depending on, okay, how immersed are you into this world, into the culture, into the language? But, you know, starting with those exposures and having a reliable source, whether it's a deaf person or like a very qualified interpreter, just practicing good morning, you know, just doing those little things as you're, I know when we come into the room, because I worked K-5, and I love the little ones. Like kindergarten, first, second was my favorite. But like, you know, brain breaks that have sign language in them, or like having those dual kind of signs of, there's a ton of resources on Teacher Pay Teacher of like play or please or like take turns, and just finding those quick little videos and just incorporating them and just doing them. And you don't always have to do the why, and kids will just like bathroom, you know, just simple stuff or more. I mean, some of these kids, like, they know more, they know mommy, they know milk, they know food, you know, and just kind of keep that up and practice how the tools will actually help. And like, because most of the time, a lot of hearing parents teach their hearing babies, which isn't a bad thing, sign language, but hearing parents don't always teach their deaf kids sign language. And so just keep using those little things, you know, just finding, I was like, ooh, this is a new one. Or like, I have a good friend who's a music educator, and I was like, hey, do you want me to come and teach your kids how to sign a song? And that's, you know, I still at 32 remember signing at 5 years old. I was like, I learned how to do it. I couldn't tell you if I did it right, but I knew I did it. And like, Jesus loves me, you know, those kinds of things in Sunday school, that exposure to know that there's others out there, and then just kind of sprinkle that opportunity for the future. Thanks.
How long did it take you to feel comfortable in being fluent?
Good question. How long did it take me to be comfortable until I was fluent? I had a head start on my college classmates because I started my exposure in high school. So I would say I transferred to Kent State beginning of my sophomore year, and by the end of sophomore year, I was pretty comfy. But I think that comes from me and how I process language. I mean, even at 5, if I heard a song once, my mom's like, "How do you know the lyrics?" I'm like, "I don't know, I just listened and then I could parrot copy it." So I think for me, processing language was really easy, and I think my comfort with expression and moving and like being silly and storytelling was also easier for me. But the hardest part is always seeing deaf people and then seeing my second language and putting it into my first language because I'm monitoring myself while I'm doing it. I'm like, oh crud. Okay, those fingers are like really short and really stumpy, and I missed that letter, and then you kind of get in your head. So there was a point in my junior and senior year which was processing the language, and there's different methods of, okay, I have all this language, here's the topic, here's all the details, and like which way do you think about and approach the language. And so learning, after you have a foundation in sign language, there's a difference between I know sign language, I can use sign language, and I can interpret in 2 languages, because it's not the same skill set. And unlike translating, you have written and written or spoken and spoken. And that's usually, okay, I hear it in the original language, and then I have to put it into the target language or the B language, whatever you want to call it. And there's, okay, I hear the whole message, now I put it out. My job is I hearing it in one language, I put it out in the other language. Or I'm seeing it in one language and I'm putting it out at the same time. And I still have to make sure it makes sense. And I'm hearing myself, I'm like, that was a bad word choice, or that's not the right word, or they do something funny, and I'm like, hold on one second for the interpreter, and I'm like, what does that mean? I was like, oh, tall, okay. And one thing I didn't mention is just like spoken language, there is accents. What we call a water fountain, some point in Wisconsin, they call it a bubbler. What we call cornhole, someone might call bags or bago. That exists, those variances. And because I interpret for deaf people over the United States, sometimes ordering food is a nightmare because I'm like, you want what on your pizza? You want a mushroom? Is it broccoli? Like what thing shape is this? So a lot of variation, a lot of fun. You never know what you're gonna get. Yeah.
Any other questions?
Katie is a former teacher for many years, primarily at the elementary level. What is the rate of reading development?
The rate of reading what?
Of reading development. How does reading develop with children who rely on American Sign Language?
Oh, one other thing. The deaf community like to be called deaf. They don't like being called hearing impaired because that impaired, that's the emphasis that they cannot do something. So if you know a person who is deaf or hard of hearing or, that has a hearing loss, that's kind of how the deaf like to be called. So I was like, she's avoiding the word because she doesn't know maybe how to be called. So I just want to put that out there. And little side note, capital D, deaf, means you are in the culture. You know who you are. Sign language is your primary language. Little d, deaf, is my grandma, who has hearing aids and couldn't hear worth a diddle at 95. And hard of hearing, you kind of are somewhere in the middle of you probably can use your voice to speak. You probably use hearing aids or a cochlear or a Baha, which is a bone-anchored hearing aid. And so to hear in a restaurant or in a busy place. So 0 to 5 is super important to give them as much as you can in the best way that's going to be the easiest for them to understand, whether that's sign language or spoken or both, simultaneous communication. But sign language is so helpful for anyone. When my grandma, she had a stroke, and I was like, okay, I'm a sign language interpreter, I got this. she doesn't know sign language, so that wasn't an option. But I went back to my school days and like, I'm gonna get a whiteboard, and I bet you she can read, and like, just like I became the preschool teacher and she was the student, and I'm like, okay, gonna write on the board. Great, here's the picture. This is who is in the picture, and we doubt people who have disabilities, but they are so much more capable than we usually give them credit for. And there's another little tangent. Gallaudet University had its big protest in the 1980s, and they wanted to vote in a deaf president because the school board, I think, was about to vote in a hearing president, and this is a deaf university, the only university for deaf and hard of hearing people in the whole world. And there was going to be a hearing person running the university. The students did not like that. And so deaf president now became a huge movement and a big, big movement in that era. And they did actually hire a person who was deaf. He was later deafened, King Jordan. But he says, the only thing a deaf person can't do is hear. But everything else, they just do it a different way. They are very creative, and deaf people are very good at navigating the hearing world. So that's my tangent.
So I got one.
Go ahead.
I'm also hearing impaired, been
Yeah.
since all my life.
Yeah.
To learn ASL, do you have any sites you highly recommend that are better versus one versus another?
Yeah, it's been a minute since I've been in the acquisition portion of it, and I know there's a few that I will look up that are made by deaf people, and it's deaf people on the platform, not just hearing people. So I think there's, that's a different company, it sounds like it. I will think about it. Or if you just want, I know Niall DeMarco is, I think he created an app. He's a deaf model. He won America's Next Top Model in Dancing with the Stars without any hearing. So I would say find a group. Learning from deaf people. Once you kind of get your, you got your name down, you got your alphabet, you got your mother, sister, brother, kind of sign language one. And a lot of libraries or community groups will offer sign language classes, or a church. Columbus is a great resource because the Ohio School for the Deaf and Blind is right here in Columbus. And so they will have a lot of resources, or I know there's, what is it called? Ohioans with Disabilities. There might be another letter or word in there, but I would say just Google, sign language courses, and learning from people is so much easier than learning in the 2D because it's 3D. And deaf people are very gracious. They just want you to try and show up. And once you will find so many people who are just like you, you look a little bit older than me, but back in the 90s and the 80s, if you've ever seen Mr. Holland's Opus, great movie, would recommend. But parents didn't know. Okay, my child has a hearing loss, go to speech therapy, wear a hearing aid, be like me. And sign language wasn't encouraged then. And you're no better off, or you're not worse for that. Many people experience that. And that's very common in the deaf community where I didn't have language, or it wasn't until I was 5 that this young lady who's 22, who just got a college degree, is teaching me words for the first time, and I don't know what any of this means, and it's my second language for their first language. So I would encourage you to talk to people, and then you'll find those people who you can connect with who share a similar story, because it's a very common one out there. But if you need to practice, there are books. I have books that were published in probably the 80s and 90s, because that's when they did all of those. But I'd be happy to give you a book, let you borrow it. It probably has my handwriting in it, but I will look for some apps, and I will try to think about that, and I will get it your way. But yeah. Yes? How does sign language fit in with the nonverbal community? I would say it's a very good tool, and it depends on what that community has. I used to volunteer at a deaf camp called OYO, and we had, students who are hard of hearing, use cochlear, use their speech, don't know a lick of sign language, to students who are like 7th-generation deaf. And then we had students who had cerebral palsy and autism and had a hearing loss, but their other disabilities were more primary for them. And so it's a great tool. And again, that's kind of what I was saying, is never underestimate what they can comprehend and receive with their receptive skills. But it is very common. Another person in my high school, she was in choir with me, and I don't remember if she had Down syndrome or not, or was just on the autism spectrum, but learning sign language was really helpful for her because she couldn't speak until she was, 5, 6, 7. And so her family learned that, and it is a very helpful tool. But there's also things called home signs, where if maybe they have cerebral palsy, or if they are missing digits, or one hand can't open, that they'll modify it to a way that they can understand one another. And so it's always best if it's based on a true language and not just made up. But when you go to a deaf school, you've got kids from all walks of life, all types of language exposures, and that's how language develops, with 6, 7, and all the silly things of modern spoken language. Sign language does the same thing, of like, this kid from Connecticut and that kid from Wisconsin went to the same school, and now they've swapped signs about, this was my regional sign for this thing, that's your regional sign for that thing, and that's kind of how it spreads. As language develops in English, it also kind of develops in a different rate in sign language. But it is a really great tool, to be all done. Do you want more? Do you need help? Those kinds of things, depending on what they can do and if they have to modify it. In language development, I want to say somewhere between 18 months and 2 years old is when you can start signing. And if younger, depending on, capabilities. But mom is that, but they might do this first. They got the location of the sign, they have the hand shape of the sign, but they don't quite have the palm orientation and which finger's touching. Or this is the sign for more, and because their hands, bones and all that, can't articulate, they'll do that, and that means more. And that's a very normal, that's their babbling, or just like, if that's the sign for play, they might do this as play, and which would be different than all done. But it's that kind of like, okay, I see you doing it, and I can't make my fingers articulate, just like, we don't expect 3-year-olds to write their name because they can't hold the pencil correctly. Same thing with sign language. They'll get that approximation. They'll usually get 3 of the 5 parameters of sign language. So, lots of things. Do we have anyone from online? Come on, guys. I had someone on online, but maybe she missed it. That's okay. Wonderful. That's okay. Hi, people. Thank you for coming. I just want to thank Kathy and Sally and Steve and everyone who was involved with this. Thank you for making this possible and for spreading the word. It's very good. So we'll practice one more time. Hello. Thank you. Welcome. And if you want to know more, you know where to find me. So.
Thanks very much, Katie.
You're welcome.
Thank you for coming.
Oh, and applause. Visual applause. Anyone can do this. I was doing this at convention because you can see it and it's big. So, all done.